Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's edition of You're Leaving Again. As Trish said, I'm Laura, your USO host, and today's really exciting because Corie and Matt will be joining us together on screen for the first time in several months. They have been reunited, and the topic at hand is reintegration. That's a topic that a lot of couples tend to avoid talking about or dealing with, usually in the excitement of being together again. But it is a really important topic. And as Corie and Matt will talk to you today about, it's probably one of the most important aspects of the military separation cycle. So we're really looking forward to hearing how they are handling it and tips for how you can do well once you go through your own reintegration. And so without further ado, I'd love to invite both Corie and Matt on screen with me. We are so excited to see you two together. Matt, we're thrilled that you made it home safely. And I will turn it over to you and join you at the end.
Hey, Laura, we are also looking forward to hearing how we're handling it.
We've been giggling during your introduction, like, how are we handling it?
I don't know.
It's great to be with all of you guys. My name is Corie. Matt. We didn't match on purpose, but it just kind of worked out that way.
I actually have less shirts to choose from, so she has greater options. So she's constantly matching me. I can't help it.
Oh, goodness. We are so glad to spend some time with you guys. Just a real quick, for those of you guys who are new to this series, the USO, like they said, has been following Matt and I during this deployment. And what we really wanted to do from the beginning was to put out content that we felt like is not anywhere else. When we talk about what is it like for a military couple to spend some time apart, whether it's through trainings or deployments or an unaccompanied tour or anything like that, where some of you have geo-batched before or are geo-batching, this military lifestyle puts us through these situations where we have to spend some time apart and figure out how to continue to build our marriage and keep our families strong. And so in the USO, when we talked with them about allowing them to follow us during a deployment, we really wanted to be authentic and share our journey, but also put out some hopefully helpful content that will help you guys as you maybe are going through some similar things. And so if you're just now joining us, there are other parts of the series where we kind of covered almost everything, like before he left, and what that was like to go through the first month apart. We've covered parenting and intimacy and holidays and all kinds of stuff.
Recovering from big wounds.
Recovering from big wounds. That happens a lot in marriages when there's time apart. And so today we're going to talk all about reintegration and coming back together. And Matt, you've been home for about 2 weeks?
Yeah, about 2 weeks. Yeah.
So I had a good friend that texted me yesterday and she was like, kudos to you for going through reintegration and talking about it at the same time. So we're going to do the best that we can. We would love to hear questions. If you have them, we are definitely going to take your questions. Some of you posted those questions when you registered for this. And so we have those pulled up as well. And so we're going to take some time during this first hour to give you as much of the content and updates from us as possible. And then if you can stick around after that first hour, we're just going to spend some extra time answering your questions or taking any new ones too. So real quick, again, my name is Corie. I am a licensed professional counselor that works with military and first responder families and couples. And I'm a military spouse, obviously myself. And Matt is a chaplain who's pulling up. You didn't do this ahead of time.
No,
it's
right here.
The caveat that he has to share. So
keep it saved where Jeff Daly sent his thing.
There you go.
So,
do you have it?
No, keep talking. Give me a second. I'm gonna pull it up.
There, you got it now.
Yeah. Okay, so the views expressed are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Department of the Army, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Yeah. That was it?
You didn't even have to put your glasses on for that.
No, I almost did. I kind of had to hold it. I was almost like, and that is Jeff Chaplain.
No. So we're going to just share just for a minute what our reintegration has been like so far, because we really wanted to be honest with you guys. I know we have been talking about this a lot in the last couple of weeks. I've been thinking about it a lot and really being self-aware of kind of what I'm going through, what my thoughts have been, what my feelings have been throughout the reintegration. It's been a little bit of an up and down kind of roller coaster for me, I would say. And one of the things that kind of keeps coming to my mind is actually some mentoring advice that I got from another spouse. It's a while ago, who said, it doesn't get easier or better, it's just different. And so each time you go through that separation or deployment or reintegration, and I don't want that to sound discouraging, because it actually was encouraging for me, because there was a lot of similarities that I felt like I went through as a spouse during this reintegration to the last, couple of reintegrations we went through. But it was still different because I'm different than I was before. Our kids are older, and some of your questions definitely related to parenting. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But for me, I know that there was a lot of ups and downs of feelings going on. And so you've been home for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And we'd love to know in the comments, are you going through a deployment or a military initiated separation right now? Do you have reintegration coming up? Are you in the middle of reintegration? Give us a little bit of feedback. We love interaction with you guys. I think it just kind of comes to life when we can kind of ping back and forth with what's happening in the chat. So I don't mind starting, unless you want to start.
I thought you already had, so okay. I was letting you go.
I would say, first of all, this deployment was one of the more challenging deployments for me personally. The first deployment that we went through was challenging in that we lost a lot of soldiers, and we went through a lot of understanding and learning how to care for our community, how to step in and serve within our community. I learned a lot in that first deployment of how to let other people care for me, and develop the camaraderie that happens within the military culture. And so that one was very challenging. But this one was different in that we had kind of just moved here, and it was 4 or 5 months into being here that he deployed. The kids had just started new schools, and we were kind of still integrating into the house and the community. And then we also I had a lot of stress that happened during this deployment that wasn't necessarily something that I brought on myself. We had the ice storm that happened here in Texas. The kids got COVID in the middle of that ice storm. We were up and down and dealing with quarantine and school, being in school, out of school, and trying to help them through that. And so there was just a lot of things that went on. In fact, like right before he came home, we actually had a situation where there was a guy that was on my doorstep that we had to call the police on about. And so that was like just a lot of stress to go through that I had not invited and was trying to navigate through. And I just have to be honest. And I'd love to know if there's anybody else that is in the chat, maybe a spouse. I guess it doesn't have to be a spouse, but anybody else in the chat who has really just going through a really difficult time in the past year. I know a lot of the counseling I've done for people in the past year, it's just been a rough year for everybody. And so if you've had to go through a deployment in the midst of all of that, it's for me at least, it was almost more than I could take. And so as much as I wanted this time apart for me to just rock it and for it to be like somehow easy or easier than it was in the past, this one was really, really challenging for me. And I think the hardest part going into reintegration for me was that I didn't feel like I ended as well as I wanted to. In fact, you sent this GIF kind of towards the end of the deployment. It was this GIF of this runner that was finishing a race and literally finished the race.
Like tripped, then like started stumbling, and then literally their face actually broke
the ribbon.
The ribbon, and they just fell straight down.
That's how I felt finishing the deployment. Like not only did I barely finish, but like it was not a beautiful ending. So that's how I actually started reintegration, was feeling very depleted, really low on energy, really struggling. In some ways, I think I felt insecure. I think of how I finished, wishing that I was in a stronger place to receive him home. And so that was really tough for me. And I know it was really tough for you. So maybe share what it was like for you, but also what it was like for you knowing that you're coming home to me, kind of wrestling with that.
So for service members coming home, when you actually like finally go wheels up, or whenever that, I guess the boat pulls into port, ship, I guess I'm not supposed to say boat for the Navy, ship, it's a ship, pulls into port, the large floaty thing, let's just say that. When that pulls into port and you're finally like, and you're released, like, and you're done, like that's the first major finish line. And you take a big sigh of relief and you're just ready to turn and face home and turn and face redeployment leave and all of the roles and responsibilities that you've been like trying to manage up underneath. then finally just slide off your shoulders, and you're finally able to just kind of sigh and breathe relief, and then really shift your energy from one place, from all work related stuff all the way to home related stuff. Hopefully that you're able to just drop all of that, turn and face home, and then really give your energy to something new that you haven't been able to really kind of go all in and really just 110% give your effort towards. And so there's a finish line, but then there's also this extra little bit of, now you can really invest in something that that you may feel more, hopefully you feel more of a reward for. You feel more of a close emotional tie to that and those people. And so you get kind of a second wind, even though you may be tired and you're trying to adjust to time zones. You get a kind of a second wind to reshift that energy towards home. And you're just looking at me. That's weird. It's weird. Like, I've been so used to looking at you there, and you're.
I won't look at you anymore.
And look at me at there, and then I'll look at you. I'll look at your eyes in there. So anyhow.
Speaking of reintegration.
Yeah, it's just trying. It's like a cat, So when you reshift that energy, yeah, good. When you reshift that energy, I think we noticed the difference that you were depleted. Yeah. Like, this has been where you've been devoting your energy. Mm-hmm. Like, this environment, and these people, these two little young people, I say right over here, that's where their bedrooms are, but that you've been devoting all of your energy and your time and your effort to them. And understandably, you're like wanting to go, okay, tag, you're it. Yeah. Okay, I need a break. And that's totally great. So what we've been trying to balance is you really reintegrating within yourself, like getting back to a oneness. Because if you've got kids, then you're a single parent at home, geographically single parent, you're devoting all your time and effort and energy to their livelihood, to not just making sure they survive, but hopefully that they thrive. And you're giving away more than you actually have. And so you're constantly on this depleting, you may take 3 steps forward, but you take 4 steps back. Mm-hmm. So by the time I come home, I'm coming home with a little bit of extra energy because I'm coming into something new that I want to invest in, more than I have been able to since I've been gone. But with you, you're coming in with depleted energy. And so we've been talking and discussing the last 2 weeks of how do you get that time for you, because you're not fully re-energized and charged up. Your battery isn't fully recharged, as well as how do then we reintegrate together. Yeah. So there's that balance that we've been trying to strike.
Yeah, and it's definitely a balance. And like I said, I wish that it would have been easier. You'd think that the more we go through the reintegration, the easier it gets. But there's always, I think, depending on the season that you're going through, there's always you still have to communicate. You still have to be very self-aware, and also I think aware of what's going on in your spouse and making sure that you're communicating about that too. And so I think for us, I was kind of on this steady decline, in energy and focus and just, self-care, even a steady decline as we got towards the end. And Matt had extra time during this deployment to be able to go work out and do some self-care. And that doesn't mean it wasn't a struggle for you, because there was a whole other different set of elements that were difficult and challenging and a struggle for him. And again, we've been talking about this through the series, and we'll continue to talk through it today too, because I think it really applies to the topic of reintegration. Is what typically happens the longer that you're apart, the more it's but you're on these parallel tracks. And you're relating to each other. You're trying to intersect those tracks as much as possible, but they're two very separate experiences that you're having. And it feels like two separate worlds that are on parallel tracks. And so reintegration is really a lot about how do you re-intersect and then, kind of get on the same track. But the longer that you're apart, I think the more you carve, you're carving into a piece of wood, you're carving this track that you don't even realize that you're creating habits and routines and patterns or ways of thinking or that just kind of, you don't even realize that the way that you're loading the dishwasher or the routine that you're doing at night, that you're even connecting to that pattern or routine as if that's something that brings you a sense of peace, until there is that reintegration.
So I know
happens.
one of the hard parts is when I come back in, or when the service member comes back in, you want to be like, it seems like you have wanted to be very flexible and malleable to kind of how do we recreate this system together, and yet you had a system that was already working for you, of like, here's the schedule, here's what we do, and that's the system that has kept you sane, because predictability and having a battle rhythm keeps people sane through all the chaos that happens during deployment, just by nature. And so there's been a loveliness to your willingness to go, okay, let's be flexible, let's be malleable. All right, let's give and take here, but at the same time, you're also giving up that thing that has kept you sane for a very long time. Concurrently with a service member, we usually get on a very regimented schedule of when we eat, when we work, when we go to the gym, when we sleep, and it's a habit and pattern. So you have two adults and kids that are coming back, and all the habits and patterns have just exploded. And now you're having to try and come back and go, okay, like what works now that you're back? And so there is, for a service member, wanting to kind of not be into a habit and a pattern for a little while because it's been so regimented. And then there's also you probably wanting to be flexible, and at the same time, watching two kids, no matter what age they are, anytime you mess with their schedule, teenagers especially, they're going to like take advantage of that.
Oh, I have a great example of this. Okay. So the boys and I have two boys, they're teenagers, 13 and 16. And so throughout the whole deployment, we were working on like, what is our structure? What's the chore schedule? How do we help each other around the house? How do we like figure out? And honestly, I think we were just starting to really kind of nail it down and figure it out as Matt was going to be coming home. And so we had kind of figured out a new chore routine, a new schedule to our day, where it was something simple like a dinner, all hands on deck, everybody's helping clean up the kitchen. And then in the morning, one of the kids is going to unload the dishwasher. It just sets the tone for the rest of the day. And then the other kid does this over here. And we had just for like a couple of weeks established this new structure, and it was really working for us. And you could feel like all three of us kind of a little bit lighter, like, okay, this is working. We figured this out together. And so when you came home, it was a couple of things. Number one, the kids were so excited to have dad home, and I was too, that we kind of just threw the whole schedule out, like for the first week. Like we just kind of threw out, like just kind of, and that was a conscious choice of just going, you know what, let's just relax on chores. Let's relax on all of that. But I felt the internal kind of like, it wasn't even frustration. It just was like that adjustment that you're talking about, where it was like, ooh, this was really working, and now nobody's doing anything, and now there's more dishes, and now like we can't catch up, and like nobody's done chores in 4 days, and now I'm starting to feel kind of out of sync, but then I was like internally struggling with that. Like, do I mention it? Am I going to be seen as kind of the bad cop that gets everybody back on a chore schedule when we should be really excited and flexible that dad's home and not doing much of anything? And so just kind of wrestling with, how do I handle that? And then we even tried to re-implement that chore routine, and it's kind of not quite working as well for us, because there's more dishes to handle. There's more food that we're cooking at dinner time, and 4 people in the kitchen is almost too much for all hands on deck kind of thing. And so it kind of creates what was working during the deployment that really brought us a sense of peace and structure, and knowing what everybody's doing now has to be reevaluated. And it wasn't that it was wrong, and it also is okay that we can't do the same thing that we were doing then. We've got to figure out something new and different that works for us now. But for me internally, I was feeling all kinds of feelings. I think in the first week, there was, I'm excited that he's home. My person is back, and I want, it's been a stressful deployment. I can't wait to spend as much time with him as possible. And at the same time, the boys are excited to have him back, so they're trying to spend as much time with him as possible. And then I also have this thing that's going on of like, I'm tired and depleted, and I need to like get out of this house for a while. And so I told you even like yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, I texted him because he was running one of our kids to a doctor's appointment, and I just apologized to him and said, I feel like I've been all over the place. Like, it's like, I want you here, and I also want to spend time by myself. And then I also want to spend as much time with you as possible. And I also want to go spend some time by myself. And I know I'm back and forth and all over the place, and he doesn't know which way to go, depending on what mood I'm in that moment. So it can be a roller coaster ride, and then navigating how to communicate through that is key.
Okay, so a couple of points based off what you were saying is, number one, communication is essential.
Yeah.
So it's good that, and I'm glad, and we have that open dialogue where I don't feel threatened by you saying that you need that time and space alone. We even talked about you going to grab in a hotel room to just relax and kick your feet up and not feel like you've got to have like little teenage boys that are like, Mom, I can't find my shoes. You're wearing them. You are wearing your shoes that you're looking for. Please go to school. So there's that. Then there's also, whenever we are doing our RIP with somebody else who's coming to replace us, we have a continuity book. And we talked about this during the first deployment, in that part of the continuity book is an actual like weekly battle rhythm, where you actually like create an Excel spreadsheet. And this is a little bit much, but you could at least jot it down of like, here's what the schedule is. Like, here's the major rocks. Here's the things, So one of the ways you can do that, obviously, is with a family Google Calendar. And because we have teen boys, they're able to just shoot us stuff, and we accept it on the family Google Calendar, and we're both tracking. And then we can sit down and have our regular sync meetings that we've been talking about for the past 2 weeks. Of we really need to get back and do those calendar sync meetings where we're looking at, what are the big rocks each week? What are the ways things are done? Like, how is dinner being done now? And we always go back to this blueberry pancake moment.
Yeah, that was from our first deployment.
The first deployment, I got up on the first morning and I made blueberry pancakes, only to find out the boys no longer liked blueberry pancakes. And it was that realization of like, this isn't a dad failure. This is just, we didn't have that level of communication of how they had moved on. And so really it's, it's not feeling bad for the service member coming back into the home. Do not allow yourself to feel bad of not knowing. Just when you run up into information, you're like, wow, that's totally new information. It doesn't mean that you're a bad mother or father, parent, husband or wife. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you didn't have that information. You have to get that information and then move forward. Part of the reintegration process are the bumps. We're not wanting there to not be bumps. It's good that there are bumps and there are obstacles, and it's good there's friction and conflict, because moving through that friction and conflict is actually what draws us back in closer together. It's not that it's always supposed to be smooth. There is going to be conflict and bumps and obstacles, but pushing through that says, okay, that's why we push through it, because you're my person and you're the one I want to do life with, And so that's the way we actually, it's probably one of the best ways of reintegrating and becoming back into that oneness of a couple.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I'm going to answer a couple of the questions that you guys have put in already. These are great, and thank you for asking them. I think one of the things that I did differently this time, I think the first deployment, the first reintegration, I was afraid to say those things. I was afraid to say, here's what's changed since you've been gone, or here's what we've been doing, because I didn't want him to feel bad. And I learned from that first time that no, he actually does. There's no way for him to win if he doesn't know, and he wants to get it right. And so I think what I did better though this time is I did, even though it doesn't feel good to communicate it, trying my best to communicate those moments of going, oh, hey, here's what we've been doing, to go back to the question about the chores, like how did we, adjust, once you did come back, is being able to honestly say, actually, this is what we've been doing and it's been working. And so Aiden does this in the mornings, and then we all do this at dinner, and this is what the routine is, and it's been working, and your response was great. He's like, okay, wow, okay, let's do that. And everybody, all hands on deck. And I think it was a couple days of trying that but it's also about me being open to the change and the adjustment that needs to happen. If I'm saying, no, this is what worked for us, and so this is where you need to fit in, and this is how it needs to stay. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that are different. Like I said, there's more dishes, there's more food, there's more clothes, there's another person in the house again. And so things do need to adjust, and I need to be open to that adjustment. So to answer the question, as far as how do you get past and find what works now, I think that's part of it. I think it's, number one, it's articulating, oh, hey, you didn't realize that we have been doing this routine And it's also, considering we have teen boys, it's also good for him to know so that he can hold the boys accountable if they're trying to get out of chores or whatever, or if they're just, excited and haven't been thinking about chores, that he can join me in that parenting and go, hey guys, if that's part of the routine, let's jump in and do that together.
Yeah.
So I think it's about communicating and being open for a new routine. And here's the truth. Those of you who are the spouses at home during this time apart, the truth is that during that time apart, there's always adjustments, right? There's always these growth moments where what you were doing isn't really working as well as it used to work. And you've got to like adjust it and find the new strategy, the new chore list, the new routine, the new bedroom routine, or a nighttime routine. And so there's always adjustments, and this is just one of those. And so if we're kind of digging our heels in and going, no, you have to fit into the way that we did it while you were gone, then it kind of sets up somebody for it just may be time for an adjustment. So, okay, so there's some really good questions. Can you address conflicting feelings when your spouse returns? For spouses who've been super isolated due to COVID-19 and gained a lot of independence, new family routines, and feeling anxious about how the service member will acclimate to changes. So I think that's a great one for us to address. I know personally for me, did you want to go first?
Yeah. So one thing I want to say for service members, and I noticed this after the first deployment was, and that coming off a combat deployment, that was much different than the one I just came off of. And there is a lot of attention in the military placed on reintegration for the service member. And it's very much like they look at the spouses and they're like, okay, now treat them with kid gloves and take it easy, and make sure they're surrounded by cotton and make sure they're just taken care of, because it's all about them, right? They have done X, Y, and Z, and they need to come home and blah, 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 blah. And even like, what was it, last year or 2 years ago? When I was at CGSC, there was a guest speaker that actually got up there, not a guest speaker. Somebody actually got up there and said, hey, this is going to be a hard year for them. So make sure that when they come home,
take their backpack
off and hand them a drink and give them their slippers.
Spouses did not respond.
And we all were like, what? No, that is so. So I say all that to say this, like service members, it is your responsibility to draw the line and say, look, here's what I feel like I need. But I also recognize you need time too. Like you have been working very hard, extremely hard, dedicating yourself. So I'm holding you accountable, service members, to not go in and just take, okay? Because it is also your responsibility to now give. And giving can also mean giving space, okay? And that can also mean you may want, like, I love coming home because it's very comfortable here. I love the house. And I love, sitting around here. But I also could see in her eyes, especially with COVID and lockdowns and ice storms and all the things that have kept me working at home.
I gotta get out of here.
Yeah, like literally she's bouncing off the walls, right? And she's like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta go somewhere. So, okay, cool. I may want to sit here today.
Oh, I do want to share this. This is a great example.
Okay.
This is a great example. No, like one of the first outings that we actually had, like he had been confined to one small space. You service members know what that's like. Being confined to this one small space where he couldn't even really get outside the area much more than that. So he was so excited to just come home and get out and whatever. And I can't remember what kept us close to home, but I was very excited. We had not communicated well before the outing. I was excited because I had not left because of COVID. I had not left outside of like a 20-mile radius for like 5 months, and so when we're talking about getting out of the house, I was ready to go like 45 minutes away and go do some exploring that I couldn't do by myself and have my person with me. But I didn't communicate well that day. And so what we ended up doing is bouncing around to all of the stores that I had seen a million times over the last 5 months within that radius, but I didn't communicate to him and say that that's not what I wanted to do.
It was like an episode, it was like The Notebook. It's like, what do you want?
but I was so afraid to tell him because I don't know why. I think that was enough for him, and he was just enjoying going to the grocery store and going here and going anywhere.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I've been to this grocery store so many times. But I didn't communicate well. And so I want to be authentic with that today because it's not easy to share the things that you need to share, and it's not easy to communicate the things you need to communicate.
Mhm.
But if you don't communicate it, to be honest, by the end of that date out together, I was not in a good place, and it ended up being miserable for him because I was not happy, and all he wanted was for me to be happy with him.
Yeah.
But I didn't communicate that what I was really needing was just to get out of that radius, or to not go to the same stores I'd been to a million times. So it's not easy to, when we talk about conflicting feelings, when your spouse, it is hard to communicate those conflicting feelings. And I do want us to talk about one other kind of those conflicting feelings that comes up a lot for couples. It's not just us. A lot of spouses during this deployment have even shared with me that, it's hard to watch if you're on a deployment, if you're a service member and you're on a deployment where you have that freedom and flexibility to spend lots of time working out and getting in great shape, and you don't have access to good food. That's understandable. Remember, two parallel tracks that are very different, but difficult for each other in different ways, right? It was really hard for him to come home and be in great shape. And here I was on that steady decline, not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually. And just, I was in that decline. And he came home, what felt like to me, he came home great, like in a really good place and like ready to serve and lots of energy and ready to be intentional with the kids, as he should be. And yet, as soon as he came home with all of that energy, it was almost like I looked in a mirror and I really saw just how tired I was, just how depleted I was. And I was definitely not matching him and the energy that he had. And that was really tempting for me to go inward and shame myself and be in a place of like, wow, I'm doing terrible as a parent. I'm doing terrible as a wife. I'm doing terrible for myself personally in my own self-care. And now I'm feeling all this insecurity because what I really would have loved to have happened is for him to come home, for me to have lots of energy in the best shape of my life and matching where he is at personally and just in personal growth. And that just was not our reality this time. And so when it comes to those conflicting feelings, that was a lot of the up and down personally for me of like, what do I do with that? What do I do with the feelings that I'm having about myself? And some of those I had to be very honest with him and share, this is where I'm at and I'm really having a hard time. Like, you're like super intentional with the kids. And I feel like I haven't been that intentional for like a month or so. And I had to sit back and do some journaling of my own and go, actually, no, like I was the one taking them to doctor's appointments and getting the groceries and doing all those things that was spread out through that deployment. I was very intentional with them. It just, the energy looks different right now. And then when it comes to like that self-care, I really had to be at a place where I go, okay, I could sit here and beat myself up, or I could choose, do I want to do the self-care that I need and ask for the self-care that I need so that I can get to a place where I can start climbing my way back up, where we do match each other again, where we are in that place where I have the energy and I'm able to take care of myself and honor myself, but also honor our relationship. And, because I personally have a choice. I can choose to stay really low and decline further, or I can do the hard work and ask for what I need so that I can get to a place where we can be, both of us, in a good spot again.
So for the service member, it's incredibly important that you take the responsibility to create a safe place for your supporting spouse to be able to voice those concerns. Because going back to what I was saying earlier with the way that it's been shaped for the last 20 years at war, it's very much been about, unfortunately, often, the service member and not about the supporting spouse and what it is that they need in order to thrive and to flourish and to become the fullness of themselves. And so you've got to be the champion of that. You've got to not only create the safe place and the safe space, you've got to be the champion of that and know full well coming home that it's no longer, I'll say this, it's no longer about you. That's what reintegration is. It's like, it's no longer about me as a one. It's about how do we then become the one that we were. And this is, our reintegration hasn't been that hard for the last couple of weeks. We've been talking about it, knowing that today was coming up, but especially because we were journaling the entire time. You know, we
Yeah.
have like 750 pages of journals
It's a lot.
over the course of 161 days.
Mhm.
And so we knew what was going on in one another's lives. It's that much more difficult if you're coming home and you have no concept of what you're walking into or what's walking into your house.
Yeah, and we have a great question, and keep bringing those questions in, because we'll definitely camp out on most of your questions as we get to that last segment of the webinar today. Because there's a couple of things that we kind of sat down and really kind of fleshed out, like what is it that we've actually gone through, and how can we teach it in some content that you'll be able to walk away and actually apply it to your lives. And so I want to make sure that we go through that today, and then we'll kind of give that extra time to some extra questions. But before we get into that content, I do want to address this one question that says, how do you balance being understanding of the service member having a stressful time and needing downtime, but also the member at home going through their own stressors? And I think it's a valid question, because every couple is different, right? Like, this could have very easily been switched, right? This could have been where I was thriving at home and the service member came home, or Matt came home and was really needing downtime to deal with jet lag and deal with just kind of turning his brain off. We hear a lot of stories of service members coming home and sleeping things off for days, or needing to play video games and disconnect. And you may need to be able to speak to some of that as well. But I think that my answer would be, when it came to us, this is just what I do. And so personally, every time I had my own feelings of like need, of like, I need time to myself, or I need to go outside of that radius and get out of the house, or we've even been talking about the last couple of days about, should I go get a hotel room and have that night to myself? And we have an opportunity to go out with friends instead. And so I have this difficult choice. Do I go and spend time with community because I really need that? Or do I need self-care more? Which one do I need more? And how do I, so every time that I kind of found myself in that place of need and deciding, how do I take care of myself and ask for what I need? I think there was also a part of me that kind of didn't push it down, but kind of paused on it and kind of thought to myself, all right, Matt also has needs here. What is it that he is needing? And I think we've been really trying hard to just check in with each other of like, this is kind of what I'm feeling like I need. What is it that you need? And how are you doing with your integration? And are you getting the rest that you need before you go back to work? Are you getting the time that you want for the boys? And I mean, even yesterday, maybe it was even, all the days are blurring together, but I was kind of tiptoeing around, something I was wanting to read.
So yesterday she walks in the kitchen and I'm like cleaning the kitchen and she goes, is it okay if I go sit and read a book? And I was like, what the crap? Like, be a grown adult. Like, the boys are like doing their own thing. And I literally was like, okay, I'm not even going to respond to that. I was like, repeat after me. And she was like, oh, so she's playing.
He walked me through, I want to go read a book.
No. It was, I am going to go read it. There's a difference between can I go read a book? I want to go read a book, and I am going to read a book.
Yeah.
Like, at that point in time, you're like, I'm going to go read. There you go, grown adult. The ball is in your court, grown adult. Go make grown adult decisions.
Well, and if we're not careful, we can find ourselves tiptoeing around each other and managing each other's emotions. And so for me, I was like, that was my way of saying, I'm willing to sacrifice what I'm needing right now if you feel a certain way. And what he was trying to help me do is like, if that's something that you want or need right now, then own what it is that you need and go and do that thing. And if I have feelings about that, now if I'm like spending 10 hours a day reading a book and I'm not engaging with him or the family, then that's a whole other topic, right? But this is talking about me spending an hour or 30 minutes going to read a book. So I think it's about, how do we have these conversations and make sure that we're communicating in kindness, communicating assertively though, and doing our best to not be really passive and not owning what we need. Also not being passive aggressive, which is like, I'm going to wait till you guess that I'm miserable and then somehow figure it out and help me with what I need. And instead just asking for it.
Yeah. So you have to phrase it as in you have to know yourself well enough to know what it is that you need and what you want, and to be able to articulate that within like a defined set. So for me, if I'm the service member, if I'm like, hey, I really feel like I need to go spend time with, our oldest son and really check in with him. So I would like to go do this, this, and this with our oldest son. And I can kind of give those parameters. It sets expectations. So you can go, okay, I put it in my mind. You're going to be gone from here to here with him. Great. That's good. Now I need to know what we're going to do with the youngest. Conversely, if you're like, hey, I really need to go do X, Y, and Z for the morning, and I'll be back around lunchtime or after lunch, or I need to be gone the whole day and to do X, Y, and Z, then it's just me going, okay, cool. All right. Now I can set that expectation. I can work around that. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to know what the difference between your need and your want, be able to articulate that, speak for yourself, mm-hmm. and set those expectations well so that we can do that, so we can integrate this. That's why sitting down with a calendar is so important. It requires intentionality, because if you attempt to do reintegration by accident, kind of meandering through each little day, it's not going to go well.
Yeah. These questions are so good. Keep having them come in. I do see them. We're going to get to them here in just a second. Yep. What I want to do real quick is I want to screen share. You were given a listening guide, a PDF when you registered. And this was what we pulled together as far as just some content that we think would help you, just kind of a framework of thinking about reintegration. So I just want to go through a couple of these things before we get to questions. So let me screen share this with you here. Okay. So one of the things that we were talking about, like how do we sum up some of the things that you guys or that we're going through, is two things. We're calling it like mines in a minefield, because if you're not communicating about it, if you're not addressing it within yourself and being very self-aware, it's almost like going through a minefield and you're going to step on a mine at some point. Something's going to explode or you're going to get into a conflict. And so these are just two things that we would want you to just really be mindful of as you're going through integration. So the first mine is the direction of energy. And this, we've kind of alluded to this a little bit, but think of it through this framework, that when the service member comes back into the home, the energy shifts, the patterns of where attention is being given shifts. And so where for me and the boys, it was kind of the three of us kind of like, it wasn't like any one of us was revolving around one or the other. It was whoever needed it the most. We were revolving around that person. When Matt came home, for the boys, their attention is now, their energy is going towards Matt. And so your kids, depending on their ages, that energy is going to shift towards them. Now, anytime a pattern shifts in a family, it's going to create some level of chaos somehow, somewhere. And that's really important for you to remember. And so when the energy was shifting from the boys to him, that was an adjustment for me. I don't think I was quite prepared for that. And so I suddenly felt like I was kind of on the outside. They were just so excited. I had this like really humorous reaction to the first night we had dinner together, and we were making pork tenderloin, and I had bacon, and we were putting bacon around the pork tenderloin. And it was not the first time we had bacon wrapped pork tenderloin. And my oldest was like, I'm so glad Dad's home, because now we're having bacon around the pork tenderloin. I'm like, I've done that so many times, like even during the deployment. Why is he getting the attention for it?
Dad dinner.
And I know, and I felt like suddenly like, oh, like my energy and my efforts were not being seen, and it was all being directed towards Dad. Mm-hmm. Now, I had to like catch that pretty quickly, but I was starting to spiral and feel unseen. And so it's really just being aware of where the energy is going and why, and that's going to happen, and it's natural.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the service member and that energy?
Oh, well, yeah. It's like I said earlier, once you finish the deployment and you finish that finish line, then you have like kind of another surge of energy to get home and to see people that are familiar, being in comfortable situations. And so that kind of re-energizes you, because you're going back into something where you probably have a lot more options ahead of you, in front of you. And so things are more comfortable. They are more familiar. And so you bring that energy, and the energy is like, how do I plug back into the family? Okay. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's from the guilt of, this is my ex deployment and how many times I've been gone, and I want to come back in, and I want to, not waste a moment. I want to make sure that I've checked in with the kids, checked in with my spouse, and make sure that we are all good and everybody is, 5 by 5. And so there you have that little kind of that new level of energy. It doesn't mean that you're not going to burn out quickly, because you can be spending a lot of energy trying to make up for lost time, but that you have that energy, and it's very much directed outwardly to the family, usually.
And for those supporting spouses, typically what's happening is by kind of like that decline that, like I was describing, you get to this place where you really want to take care of yourself more. And so the energy is starting to go like, how do I take care of myself? How do I get myself, where I spend that time by myself or recharge or something? It's you're anxious to kind of do that tag you're it kind of thing. And so all the energy is actually being directed towards yourself. Now, of course, I know we're excited that the service member's home. I'm so excited Matt's home, and I do have energy that's being directed towards him, but we're talking about like, there's this conflict of like, I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited that the kids are excited that you're here. But I also need to take care of myself. And I don't know how to do that when there's all this energy going towards the
it's kind of it's like a baton handoff in a relay race. I mean, once you've run that race and you've run your 100 meters, your 400 meters, you're kind of exhausted. You want to hand the baton off, and you kind of, you may jog a little bit while the next person is like full off on a full speed sprint, but it's a successive I forgot the word.
Okay, so
running out of energy in my brain.
And we also gave you some questions for you guys to be able to apply to your own life. So I would really encourage you to print this off and answer some of these questions to help you just kind of process where you are or where you've been when it comes to these concepts. So the second mind that we want you to be thinking about, just again, we're talking about the framework of a way to think of reintegration, is the environment and the impact of the environment and how that plays a part in reintegration. And so we kind of touched on this a little bit when I was talking about, I just needed to get out of the house and kind of expand that radius a little bit. But it is really important to understand these two parallel tracks and how it's been impacted by environment in general. And so for the service member, if they've been kind of in this we've been in a lockdown kind of situation too.
Yeah.
So how COVID, and some of your questions are asking how it relates to COVID in the last year, we'll answer those. But I'll speak for the supporting spouse.
Yeah, so there's two ways that it could go for the service member, and I've experienced both of them in the past 2 weeks. Being in a confined area where you're very much on lockdown and you've got your little circle that you kind of run, like your little triangle of work, DFAC, shower, gym, and you just keep going back and running that little square. You can very much long to just want to be home and walk around barefoot and want to be in comfortable clothes and want to not shave for a little while and not have to put on a mask and just want to just kind of be and just kind of take a big sigh of relief and just kind of flop in very familiar, comfortable space at home and not want to go anywhere. But you can also similarly go, wow, I have been on lockdown. I do want to go out. I do want to actually see what a restaurant looks like or go to a store, and I want to go to a grocery store, and I want to pick out something that isn't shipped to me, or isn't delivered to me. I want to pay for it myself and feel that freedom and that level of agency in the world. So you can go back and forth between those two areas. I think.
Isn't it interesting that that's like an adventure?
Oh yeah,
absolutely. And for me, it's a chore.
Yeah, like going to the grocery store, it's like, oh my God, I could do we have
to go to the grocery store?
I could get Fruit Loops, I'm very excited about that.
We could have Fruit Loops delivered.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a huge piece of this is like, you're ready to have this adventure, maybe even that day out. And what's the difference between how you would approach a date or adventure? And some service members are going to come home and it's too much to go out around that many people and that many stores and that many options.
They may have been living in a tent with 24, 48 other people, and they're just tired of people.
Well, and you can see that can also be ripe for sabotage, right? It's like, let's get out, let's go do something. And then you get out and then it's too much and things get sabotaged. Right. And, and it's important for both of you. Remember that what you feel and what you think and what your opinions are and what your perspectives are in any of these circumstances are both individually valid. Like what you're experiencing as a supporting spouse at home is very valid and true to you. And what the service member is going through, it's very valid and true to them. And it's not necessarily that one's more right than the other, but I think a lot of this reintegration is understanding and honoring each other's perspectives and needs and wants and where you're both coming from and not feeling shame for that, not feeling like I had to get over my shame of like, no, it was actually a very stressful deployment, and that's okay. Now, for me, what's not okay is if I stay down there. But that doesn't say anything about me. It doesn't say anything about me as a spouse that I didn't rock it better, I guess. So I think what we wanted to do is just kind of help you keep in mind both the energy and how the energy is shifting and changing and moving and adjusting, and make sure that you kind of, if you need to journal and write out your feelings in order to find your words, do that. Don't keep them to yourself, though, if they're really important, especially if they keep coming up and they keep kind of surfacing. If you're kind of like on the brink of tears and you're like, you probably need to communicate with your spouse, because they want to win. They want to get it right. They want you to be taken care of, and they need you to be in a good place. And so they can't help you do that if you don't communicate it.
Yeah.
So it can feel a little bit like who goes first, But, and here's a big one we learned from the first deployment is there is no competition here.
Yeah.
There is no one person had it harder than the other. Two very different parallel tracks, two very different situations. Nobody wins the prize for who had the most difficult, most challenging season. Okay. Right. Two very different experiences. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to come back to you here and we'll get into some of these questions. For those of you, I'm going to kind of get through and kind of catch up on the chat here just for a second. And I just want to say, if you can stick around for the next 20 to 30 minutes, we want to really dive into your questions a little bit more. So please use that Q&A box so we can make sure we don't lose any in the chat.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the question on the support network, somebody was asking, what was the support network while I was deployed, grandparents, friends, church? Do you still rely on them when I come home as part of the reintegration? Previously, we've had better support networks than we've had during this deployment, whether that was proximity to family or we had a closer church network. I know with COVID, that has made things extremely hard for a lot of just what would normally be a support network of going out and being able to hang out and spend time with family and friends. So that makes it difficult. We're an EFMP family. And so we were constantly worried about our youngest who has allergy-induced asthma. We were blessed that even though he did get COVID, that it was not worse than it was. And we've all been vaccinated, so we feel better about that now. But, you didn't have a support network other than a couple of close friends close by who we knew we could call on anytime, day or night. And you were able to call on them and they were able to reach out to you, and the church did reach out a couple of times. But I think this one was more difficult. Yeah. So really, me coming home, I think I was the support network.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like you said, I did have like but when you're going through deployment, Amazon was a huge support network, almost too much so. I think we covered in a previous series, you sent us like a ping pong table. Yep. He made sure that excited. In quarantine, we were entertained. No, but to go back to the question, I did have some friends, like especially during when the boys had COVID and the ice storm, and I could not have gotten through that time had I not had his boss's wife that dropped off medicine for us, because I couldn't go to the grocery store. We were already in quarantine before the ice storm. And so there was some key moments that were literally a godsend for us to get through. But him coming home was such a huge part of that support network of just the emotional and social, I think, energy that it was taking towards raising two teen boys. And also just trying to stay strong through a lot of different things and a lot of challenging stressors was really hard. But I think that what you're trying to ask about this question specifically is a lot of times during separation, you do rely more than you realize on neighbors and small groups and other military spouses. And so what typically happens, we used to joke about this, our first deployment. After that, I experienced it, and spouses tend to joke about it with each other, is that when the service member comes home, it's like the understandably so, the military spouses kind of like go back into their houses and nobody gets together with friends anymore. And, visually I have in my mind in Colorado, we had, this was before social media.
Mhm.
And so everybody was outside all the time and everybody's taking care of each other's kids and everybody's at the playground and we're cooking out together. And there were so many meals that we just didn't make it just for our own family. We just kind of helped each other with meals all the time. And so I remember us talking about in the neighborhood about what it was like when a service member came home. It's like we didn't see our neighbor for like months. And we were like, oh, can I go knock on the door and say, I miss you? Like, I miss having our potluck dinners and I miss taking care of each other's kids. And you were my support network. And that's a real thing. It's a real thing. And so I think what I learned from that, and Matt and I have talked about that, is that it's okay for you to have that support network. Thank goodness we have it. And so that shouldn't necessarily be shut down entirely when the family comes home and there's reintegration. You need to be able to find that balance and ask for those things and say, I really miss hanging out with my friend. Can I go spend some time with my friend and reconnect, even though you're home? And it's so important for you to be able to both ask for those things. The service member also experiences that too. I remember you coming home and saying, you'd really formed some very strong bonds with those he had been deployed with. And he equally needed to go spend some time with them too and kind of get out of the house because it can be overwhelming a lot for the service member too. So make sure you ask for those things and honor the support networks that you do have for sure. And I think our takeaway this time is using this time to make sure we continue to build up the support network that we actually need here. So that's a great question.
Yeah.
Let me pause here and say that if we do need to lose anybody due to it being a lunch hour and you can't stick around for these questions, this will go out on my podcast. All of the part of the series has been going out on the podcast and also on the USO dashboard as well. We're going to get into some resources too here in a few minutes. So stick around because we're going to answer some of your questions. Make sure you put them in the Q&A so we can get to all of them because they're really good questions and there's so much more that we could cover. So I just wanted to do that quick, like just in case we are going to lose anybody. Thank you for joining us for that first hour so much. Okay, so let's see. Let's answer a couple of these questions. And you also submitted some questions as well, and I want to pull those up too. I think we answered that top question. Let's see. Is it normal to be worried that I've changed and grown so much during deployment that my spouse won't love me? Oh, that's such a understandable, valid question.
I smile because I remember coming home from the first deployment and you had become so strong in your decision making. And meanwhile, here I am in the mountains of Afghanistan, like, and my life is just, it's just kind of handed to me. You just kind of take what you get, I mean, over there, if you fly, you fly. And if you don't, you don't, it's just kind of like whatever, you just have to kind of roll with the punches. And so who we were going into the deployment was completely reversed. Yeah. So I came home and I was like, I feel like I came home to a very angry spouse. Over time, I realized, that's kind of who I was before I left for the deployment. I was very decisive and I was very kind of aggressive. And so there was that change that we had where we were trying to figure out, okay, what's the new dance? What's the new normal in our relationship?
Well, we had both changed. I think this is true regardless of which deployment and what you go through. And regardless of what you go through in deployment, of course you're going to change because you're surviving. Right. Everybody is surviving different things, right? And so for that first deployment, he survived a whole set of circumstances that there's no way I could have understood. And for more on that, my book, Sacred Spaces, really unpacks so much of what happened during that first deployment and the changes that happened in each of us, and then what that reintegration was like, and what we both needed to learn from that process. But I was also surviving back at home with these toddlers and trying to navigate surviving with those toddlers. And I had reached a point where I was like, I can't not be decisive, or I can't anymore just get through accidentally during my day and let the world control my mood and control my day, and let the kids even control my mood or my day. Like, so I had out of survival become a much more decisive person. And I own this in the book too, that I really, I didn't see it then, I saw it later, but I really did turn into, I was angry. I was angry that even though I respected the deployment, and even though I appreciated and loved being a military spouse and loved the military lifestyle, I was also angry at the fact that we had to spend that much time apart. I didn't like it. I didn't want to go through it. And I didn't want to go through something hard. And I was angry and resentful about that. And it took me a long time to own that and to voice it and process through it. This last one was hard too. And there was days that I was upset about that too. Like, I don't want, kind of like throwing my own temper tantrum. If I don't want to go through this, why does it have to be like this? And why do I have to be far from family and support, you know? So you do change, you do grow more than you realize, because you kind of are, you know, in the spouse community, we say, you know, we say we don't have a choice. Like when people go, how did you do it? Or why are you so strong? Or how did you become so strong? You'll hear spouses often say, I didn't have a choice. The truth is you did have a choice. You had a choice to either further decline or choose something different and grow. And so it is a very normal feeling to feel like I have changed and grown and adjusted, and it can be scary. And I've been in the place where when he came home from that first deployment, I was decisive. I was in the best shape of my life, you know, and I had owned a lot of things in my life. And I, at least in my memory right now, I look back and say, I rocked it by the end, but I had an entire year to figure that out. This deployment was shorter and I felt like I didn't quite get that. And so in an interesting way, I actually experienced the fear and worry that you were going to be impacted because I had not changed or grown enough. And so it was interesting for me to actually feel a different set of feelings from the other side of things. And so I just want to say, and you can answer too, but I just want to say it is normal to feel that way, that you've either grown or you've been affected by this time apart, and you're worried about, like, are we going to be able to be on the same page, and are we going to like each other as we are right now? And I think that all I can say is communicate. Make sure that the ways that you have changed and grown still allows for room for your spouse. I think that where I see trouble with couples is when we don't create space where they can come back in the home. Or if we're saying, I'm just going to do it all myself because that's the way I feel the most peace, is loading the dishwasher the way that I want it, or the routine the way that I want it, and then not allowing your spouse to come back into the equation. That's where it causes problems. But if you've grown in a positive way, like, own that, be excited about that, share that with your spouse. Make sure you're explaining why and how you made those changes, because I have a feeling they're going to actually like that part of you.
Yeah. So one thing with family systems therapy, when you talk about change and changing a system, and I say that to kind of answer the question, you know, early on in our marriage, when we were having struggles, this was way before we were in the military, you know, after a while of you attempting to manage me and my emotionality, you at some point, you were like, look, all I can do is keep my side of the street clean and be the best me that I can. And so you decided for yourself to make changes and to grow and to mature for yourself. Now, of course, that upsets the system, because she's no longer like I'm no longer in charge of the family system household with however I'm acting, right? I no longer have that impact to be able to shift or change or influence or motivate or manipulate you with however I'm acting. You're making those decisions for yourself. And then I am then forced to make those changes. I can either leave the situation, you know, which was never a choice, never an option. And it usually is not an option and not a choice for most people. I can either, you know, throw a temper tantrum and try and get it back to what's comfortable and normal for me. Or like most people, they're finally like, well, I guess I got to grow with the system. And one thing that I believe that service members have playing to their strength is they are constantly having to change with every system. Like every time.
Spouses too. In a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're constantly having to change and reinvent ourselves. I mean, you only really recognize it when you go back to a system, usually back to your family of origin. You go back to a system that has not changed in years. I mean, it's changed, but by and large, you know, same homes, same environment, same cycles, same dynamics, same dysfunctions. And you're like, wow, I don't know how I fit into this now. And, you know, I'm different than how I fit into it 2 years ago because of the things I've had to adjust, whether it's new friends, new bosses, new homes, new schools, new doctor's appointment, no, new everything. And so it's not a bad thing. I think we are uniquely positioned to grow and to change together, and to accept that challenge. And so I would encourage you to, whoever asked that question, it was anonymous, voice that as a concern to your spouse and say, look, here's where I'm at. Here's how I've grown and I've changed. And I'm afraid that because of that, you won't love me. Now that is incredibly vulnerable, right? But then you give them the opportunity to be able to say, I guess we're going to find out, either they're going to go, no, I'll always love you. Or they're going to go, well, I love you, but I got to find out how who do I now have to be, in this new dynamic, in this new normal. So I want to change and grow with you. So it can be a great opportunity for growth. And if it's needing to go to counseling to say, here's what I've decided for myself. And you go to a counselor to say, how are we going to integrate that into our marriage, into our family, then go, so that they are allowed to be able to make those decisions for themselves and for their family of like, how are you guys going to grow together? So it could be some good changes that have caused some good changes in the family dynamic.
So just to maybe give a little bit of an example, I mean, every couple is different. And so for us, fitness and healthy eating is definitely important to us. And it's something that we go to help with coping. And so in the first deployment, he was gone for a year. And so I really got heavily into that and was really eating really well. And I remember you kind of he was doing the best that you could during deploy to kind of match that.
There's only so much you can do with MREs.
That's true. And I remember when he came back, even for R&R, I was kind of in this stuck spot of trying to eat really as healthy as possible, but he was very excited to be able to have access to a variety of foods. And so it was like we were out of sync. And I'm not imposing health and fitness on all of you. We're just telling this as an example for what it's like to have this ebb and flow of how you cope and how you change. And I think it's a really good example of like what's happening. It's like a physical example in front of you as a couple of what's happening inwardly too, right? Of that adjustment and that reintegration. And so, but I remember internally going, I don't want to go out to eat for the 10th time because I'm really making a lot of great progress on my food, and on my nutrition and on my goals. And I was really excited about those goals and then trying to reintegrate with that. I remember feeling that way. And then even for this one, he was able to work really hard on that this time. And I was really trying hard this time to apply what I learned from that first deployment and remember that and go, I really want him to feel like I'm supportive of where he is. And the goals that he has for himself physically and nutritionally. And so trying to navigate that. And so, I mean, even yesterday, but I wasn't necessarily on the same at the same place that he was at when he was coming home. And I remember feeling like, oh, do I need to like tighten that? And I kind of shared earlier that kind of insecurity of like, I don't know if I can match where he's at and what that's like. But even just yesterday, he's been home for 2 weeks and we had a conversation. It was a wonderful conversation about like how we really both of us wanted to take the time that we could to kind of vision cast on really focusing what we want our nutrition to be right now. And I don't know, that was kind of like a mile marker of reintegration, mile marker of like, oh, look, we're now it's only 2 weeks in and we're kind of getting on that same page again. We kind of had that fun of eating out and whatever, but now we're kind of reintegrating.
Right.
And so I think sometimes there's things that are happening and maybe that plays out in how you're parenting the kids, or maybe it plays out with how you're kind of enjoying food or not. But there's these things that are happening around you in the home and in your relationship that are oftentimes a good litmus test, or it's kind of a good symbol of what's actually happening. And so look for those opportunities where you're actually conversationally on the same page and kind of celebrate those internally of like, oh, we're on the same page. We're kind of reintegrating and it's all coming together. So hopefully that makes sense a little bit. That's just kind of what I noticed for us. And it's interesting in that even though I said, every deployment or every separation reintegration is not necessarily easier, it's just different. That doesn't mean we don't learn along the way. And I think that's important. However many times you've been through this, really go back and get those lessons learned. We did journal this time. We focused on communication differently this time, and that we learned a lot from that. And I'm so thankful that we learned and did something a little bit different.
Yeah, if I was going to say one absolutely just hands down wholeheartedly thing, The journaling for me, since as an extrovert, it allowed me to slow down my thinking. It allowed me to be a little bit more thoughtful about what I was feeling in a moment or whatever my response was. And that consistently over 160 days reshaped the way that I was responding to things. I can even feel it like right now, normally I'm normally very quick on my feet, but I've grown to be so thoughtful with my words that I appreciate the opportunity to slow down. And you're an introvert. You love that. Like, that's your thing. Like, sit and read and think. Yeah, woo, exciting, right? And so now what I used to be like, why can't you banter? Let's argue. Let's talk. Let's work this out. And you're like, oh, I need to think. And now I'm like, I can respect that. And so in a way, I feel like I've actually grown up to understand you a little bit better. And so at each time that there is a separation, it gives you an opportunity to redefine yourself, to step back from the intensity of the face-to-face, and to think about, like, who am I? Who are we? What do I want to go back? How do I want to reshape myself so that when we walk back into this, this is who I am and this is what I've done. And sometimes it can just be, I feel great that I survived this and kept the kids alive. That could be, that's phenomenal, right? That is a I gutted this out and I am a strong person, because it doesn't take a lot when things are going well during a deployment to finish well. It does not. Now, if things are going well and everything's good and you got all the money in the world and woo, everything's a party, great. You probably didn't grow. You probably made a few little changes, but I would almost say the harder the deployment, the better you are on the other side, because you know what you can survive. You know what you can do. You are firmly confident of it, and you should never lose that confidence in yourself and your ability.
Well, and I think it will be interesting. The last part of this series is going to be next month in June, where we're going to do some vision casting. And I'm looking forward to next month, when I have a little bit more hindsight to look back and how I will view myself with that hindsight and with that rest. And, will I look back and kind of beat myself up as much as I finished? Or will I look back and go, man, that was really hard, and I'm really proud of myself for how I actually survived all of that. So I definitely look back on the first deployment, and I have a different picture of it than I think how I felt at the end. Yeah, I really do believe that's true. And I just want to throw out one thing about lessons learned. And we'll do more lessons learned in June. But I think that as an introvert, one of the things that I would have done different with our journaling is I would have also kept as an introvert, I would have kept an additional side journal apart from the journaling that he and I were doing, because I think that was actually part of my decline, is that most of my communication energy was going towards parenting and towards him. And there was a lot of things that I didn't want to put in the journal that I needed to just process out on my own, because that wasn't really the space that I necessarily wanted to kind of put that first draft. If it was a negative thing or something, I just needed to kind of work that out of my system. But without doing that side journaling on my own on the side, I think that that's kind of probably what pent up over time, and I didn't put that anywhere. And so that was I think a lesson learned that probably contributed to me struggling there towards the end. So I want to be authentic with that.
So I want to answer one, and you can, I think a lot of those you can actually, talking about planning and scoping. So one question that came in earlier was talking about undiagnosed PTSD trauma response.
That's an important one.
From high tempo deployments, toxic command, and how do I support him through emotional shutdown? I can fully understand that, right? Because coming off the first deployment, I wasn't right for about 18 months, even as a chaplain. And as much as I was having to respond to everything that my service members were going through and to carry their burdens for them and with them and walk alongside them in some very dark places, and still do with a few of them, 10, 12, 11 years later after it, that it's always going to be there. Those are sacred moments, I think, in your service member's life, that with each new season in life, they will reprocess. What's important, number one, you're not the only support network for them. You're a support network for them, and a safety place for them, but don't attempt to be all of it. What I will say to the service member is that go get the help. Okay. Look, here's the deal. Look, go talk to your. Also, I'm a unit chaplain. Go talk to your unit chaplain. If you don't like them, that's fine. There's a lot of chaplains I don't like. That's okay, right? So if you don't like them, go find another one. Go talk to behavioral health. Go talk to somebody off post. Go find somebody, even if you have to pay out of pocket. It is so worth it to have a sacred place where you can go and you can just drop all your stuff and not have to go pick it back up for a while, to just drop it off for a week and then go back to work and then just go and complain and vent and, dare I say, cuss and throw it out there. Because whether it's combat issues, toxic command climate, which can almost feel worse, honestly, in my opinion, than combat issues, because it feels like broken trust. It feels like betrayal. It feels like it's a moral and a spiritual injury where you're just wounded. You're supposed to be able to trust and rely on and be taken care of. And then all of a sudden you come into a toxic climate where they may not be yelling, they may not be cussing, but you just feel like you're always getting gaslighted with something. That's horrible. And it can take so much energy to try and maintain your military bearing in a toxic command climate. And that will wear you down even more than combat, because especially in combat, you can at least get that out. Okay. You can actually shoot back at a combatant. You can actually get some of that energy out. You can't do that in a toxic climate. You just sometimes just have to take it. And so you have to go find somebody you can actually talk to, and to be able to get that out. So I encourage the service member, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, go and unpack that and drop that off for somebody that is paid to hold that, so that you don't have to walk around holding it. And for the supporting spouse, encourage them to do that, be a listening ear, but then also be a guide for but for what is true, okay? Which is always reminding the service member, okay, these are the things we know to be true and to be right, especially if you're dealing in a toxic climate.
Do you have an example of that?
Like if you're, like if I've ever come home from, being in a command climate that was just like, I feel like I'm crazy. I feel like I have to accept that the world is crazy. You remember the one years ago, that I actually had to go to counseling for. I actually had to go to a hypnotherapist for. I was so messed up in my head and having panic attacks from dealing with my commander. And I'm a chaplain dealing with a brigade commander at that time, that I literally was like, not only can I not do this, all my other field grades can't do this, and I'm keeping them from losing their stuff too. It was that bad. And I would come home and I'd be like, do I suck? Am I awful? Do I not know how to do my job? I would come home with all these self-doubts about me and the world. And you served as an anchor. You were like, no, that is not you. That is not true. This is who you are. This is what you're good at. I believe in you, and I know that you're doing your best. And you know what? This too shall pass. Okay, so go be the best you that you can be in that moment. And don't let them define you. That was hugely impactful for me, for you to speak life and truth into me in those moments.
Well, and let me also encourage those. I think this is such an important topic that's why it's important for us to spend extra time on it. And so I want to speak to the supporting spouses at home. I just want to give you a couple of things as well, because we learned a lot, like he's saying. First of all, I would say, yes, being that truth speaker. And I know it's really hard. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been that spouse that's like, can't you set a boundary? Can't you just tell somebody to stop? And like, you know what? I think I'm always going to say that. I know that there's times that you can and sometimes you can't, right? Like, I'm like, time to fight. But being a truth speaker is really important. I would also say, and this is a tightrope kind of feeling of inexperience, but I think that, in some ways, if your spouse is coming home with, whether it's a trauma response or combat fatigue, that's a thing, right? Where it's compassion fatigue, or just, it's not quite PTSD, but it's kind of close, right? They're still reacting. Noises cause them to startle. They're doing the hypervigilance. There's panic attacks, or there's just escalation or irritability or things like that. I just want to say that you do have incredible influence as a spouse to create a little bit of a cushion, right?
Mhm.
For a period of time where I know you're tired and you're weary and you really need that self-care, and you need to find ways to ask for that, right? So maybe in the beginning part of that reintegration, maybe that looks like you still calling on that support and that friend to help with childcare while you go take care of yourself, so that you don't overwhelm your spouse, who might be not able to handle all of the noise of the kids just yet, right? There's ways to work that out. So make sure you don't sacrifice yourself. My new phrase lately is don't abandon yourself to manage everybody else if you're going in that decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take care of you, but for a period of time, have that cushion there, so that you're being aware and protective of a little bit of like, I'm not going to like pack the car full of balloons from the airport or from the welcome home ceremony with a service member who's been in combat, right? Those balloons are going to pop, and we're going to have like a major startle response. We're going to have a little bit of a cushion and some understanding. At the same time, and to be that buffer when you can for a period of time. But at the same time, I think going back to that truth speaker, there are definitely those times though that you go, hey, I don't know. Please tell me what else I can do to support you.
Right.
But at the same time, I think it's time for you to go get some help,
Yes.
because I'm reaching the end of what I know I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I can be a clinician for you. I don't know if I can be your battle buddy. I don't know if I can be who you need me to be.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you're not leaving the house. You're not asking for help. And so that's where we have good, healthy boundaries in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt and I at various seasons have had to be that for each other. I would say you've been that for me during this reintegration, where he's like, what do you need in order to get well?
Yeah.
Because he can't do all of those things for me. At some point, I'm the one that has to go and do whatever I need for that self-care.
Right.
And that's healthy boundaries in your marriage.
Yeah.
So for those of you who might be dealing with somebody who is struggling with coming home and readjusting, out of love and kindness, you can provide that cushion, but healthy boundaries in your relationship are also extremely important too, for you to be that mirror to your spouse.
Oh, I was about to say that. That's why I tapped your shoulder.
So that's our little cue to each other. We
Hey,
tap
I was
each
going
other.
to say, being the cushion, being the mirror, holding them accountable,
kindness.
and in kindness. Because here's the thing: if I'm asking you to be my therapist, while you're eminently qualified to do that, that takes you away from being my spouse.
And I also may not emotionally be at the place where I can be that.
No, you
either. So
the spouse is never at a place to be a professional therapist for their spouse. The spouse is never at a place to be a professional therapist to their spouse.
And what I meant by that is you, even what you feel like you should be able to offer, if you may not even be at that place to even offer what you normally be able to offer.
It's a different dynamic. And so, I mean, there are things that we will each need from one another in the healing and reintegration process with whatever's happening in our life, that if we're too busy doing something else, we're not going to be able to offer that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. Okay. So there's been some resources that have been put in the chat, which are great. Give an Hour is definitely a great for free counseling. I used to be a Give an Hour therapist. Basically means they're willing to donate to like one family until that family is done with treatment. Donate hours. Military One Source is non-medical, so it's under the radar. You get about 12 sessions with a clinician through Military One Source. As a couple, that's a really easy way, especially for service members, to get some quick help, not for severe issues like diagnosed PTSD, but if you're not really sure what's happening and you need kind of an evaluation on that, Military One Source is great. Your MFLACs are there to be able to support you as well. Your chaplain. So there's great resources. I have the Life Giver directory on my Life Giver website. That is over 200 clinicians worldwide, a lot of them military spouses and veterans who are very culturally competent to help you through both that take TRICARE or private pay that can help you as well. So to wrap up our time, a lot of the remainder of the questions are really asking about how do you proactively prepare for reintegration. So we're going to kind of cover that really quick. We haven't dived as much into parenting. So this question about, do you find planning a lot in advance for reintegration of families with small children to be helpful? I would say yes and no. So I think that there are some things that are great to proactively plan, such as maybe you don't fill your calendar with a ton of things. Like I made the mistake on that first appointment when our kids were small. Well, it wasn't a mistake. It just was kind of a matter of like the kids had a field day that the day he came home. And I couldn't quite miss field day. And yet you needed to come along, and it just was a lot to go through on the first 24 hours. But, we did the best we can. I collapsed, on the high jump mat, and I was like, Tag, you're it. And I probably should have helped a little bit with that.
Picture in the book.
Yeah, there's a great picture of me just that's how exhausted I was. And so I would just say, try not to plan too much on your calendar as much as possible. But as far as small children, depending on how small they are, school activities are still going on. It's the end of the year right now. We have band concerts and banquets and things still happening. And so do the best you can, but be flexible with who needs to go to that? Are both of you going to go to that? How do we communicate through that as much as possible?
But I will say, with planning with especially with small kids, having regimented schedules decreases the amount of change in the environment
for the kids. Yeah,
for the kids.
Which is helpful.
If the kids become the epicenter of keeping calm in the home, then just kind of on a glide path of kind of plugging back into those little patterns for a little while, reintegrating, then in case you want to diverge from those. But I would never recommend somebody disrupt a young child's schedule.
So here's how I would say that. The younger the child, the things that are the most important to maintain their emotional security, their sleep schedules, the things that really are going to kind of wreak havoc on their moods, those things, I would do your best to not change them as much as possible, but send those schedules and make sure your spouse is well versed in understanding. Here's kind of what I have figured out. This is the perfect cocktail or recipe for this child to be in as good of a mood as possible. But maybe you're adjusting on other things, maybe that bedtime routine where you can be a little bit more flexible, and the service member can read that book instead of you, right? Yeah. Or help with bath time, or you're both there for bath time or something like that. So be flexible on the things that aren't going to have them kind of melt into tears, but stay on track with schedules on the most important things. And then the older the kids get, the more like we said with our teenagers, the chores went out the window, all the routine went out the window for a couple of days, and that didn't throw anybody but me, so and I needed to handle that and address that with everybody else. I threw the temper tantrum. So tips on parenting reintegration. How do we get the spouse on board with new routines? Send it to them. Do like he said earlier, where don't be afraid to sit down and go through as much as possible what has changed with your kids, so that there's as little new surprises as possible. They really do appreciate that, I think, more than we give them credit for. Okay, we're almost done here. I think the last, there's a couple of questions about communicating during the distance. We have all of the resources and the PDF guides that have been in the previous of the series that we've done. We did a whole month on communication. So I'm going to encourage you, if you're looking for information on intimacy, on parenting, on communication, things like that, I would encourage you to go back to the previous parts of this series where we really took a whole hour or two to go through some of that. And so we're going to kind of wrap up this time. I think in closing, I just want to encourage you guys to communicate through your reintegration. Even if you feel like it's just you being insecure and feeling like you're emotionally all over the place. That was definitely me this time. I'm glad for the times that I spoke up, and even the times that were really hard, where I felt really vulnerable and really just kind of felt stupid for saying what I needed to say. It was more important that I just let him know where I was at, even if it was just like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to get through it, but this is just what I'm feeling, or this was the reaction that I had when you said such and such to the kids. Like, I'm not proud of it, but it's kind of what I'm going through, and I'm having a hard time shaking it off. Honestly, he's my battle buddy. And there are battles that if you're going on in your own head, these battles, and you're not really winning those battles, then go to your spouse and communicate those things so they can join you in the fight. Because they're your person. That's what they're there for. And then if you as a couple are really struggling with, you're not really winning those battles together, then go and invite somebody to help you through that and get the professional help that you need. Spouses, support spouses. I would encourage you to go get counseling during the separation. Looking back, I wish that I would have probably done that and done some telehealth and taken my own advice. I was doing a lot of telehealth for other people. It probably would have been beneficial for me to have that myself. But even reintegration, there's no shame in going and getting professional help to help you with the reintegration, even if things are going fine.
Mm-hmm.
Counseling can be a great time to celebrate what you're doing right. It's not always just what's going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's great to have somebody go, actually, you guys are doing pretty good. Keep up the good work. Maybe tweak it here or there, but otherwise you're doing a great job. So get the help. It's there and it's available if you need it. Okay.
Yeah.
Any closing things that you want to say?
Be patient and be graceful with yourself and one another.
That's the easiest way to say it. So Trish, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thank you guys so much for joining us for another part of the series. Join us in June. We're working out on the dates on that. Matt's going to get back to us on when he can join us for the last one in June. But be on the lookout. We're going to talk a lot about vision casting. We're going to do a lot of like lessons learned from like with better hindsight of what we learned overall from our time apart, but a lot about what it looks like to learn from anything that you've gone through that's difficult in the military lifestyle and vision cast going forward of how are we going to be different from this point forward, given what we've gone through and what we've learned. So be on the lookout for that in June. Thank you guys for joining us. Trish, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thanks, guys.